Chapter 9. 4 Kinds of Happiness. We have in common one thing that is the driving force behind everything we do: our search for happiness. Everybody looks for happiness, but very few people find it. The first and second noble truths of the Buddha's teachings clearly state that worldly happiness is a myth. Yet we never give up hope of achieving it. This is good, as we would otherwise be constantly depressed at not having found what could make us unconditionally happy. The happiness of the sense contacts. The Buddha spoke about 4 different kinds, or grades, of happiness. The first one arises because of contacts made through the senses. The Buddha compared these to a skinned cow, where flies are sitting on the raw flesh constantly causing irritation. This is an in-depth understanding of our sense contacts. The Buddha also mentioned sensory contacts as the first means of gaining some happiness. Most people remain at that stage. We can't always get the pleasure we are seeking, and even when we do get it, it escapes us again and again, so that there is no chance of constant happiness through our senses. There is happiness at those times when the sense contacts are pleasant. There is unhappiness when the sense contacts are unpleasant, when the body is uncomfortable, or we don't hear the words we'd like to hear, and we don't taste what we like, or what we smell is unpleasant, or see sights that we'd prefer not to see. Nobody avoids such experiences in life. It's impossible to go through the whole lifetime without unpleasant sense contacts. It's also impossible to go through a whole lifetime without pleasant contacts. We have, one might say, a 50-50 possibility, if we have good karma. Half the time our contacts are pleasant and fine, and half the time they are not. Most people keep on trying to increase the pleasant contacts and hope to make them happen 100% of the time, which is impossible. There's no chance of success, yet most people continue to try. Most of us blame external events when unpleasant or painful feelings make us unhappy. The real reason, of course, lies inside us, because of our reaction to sense contacts. The more a person is purified, the more pleasant sense contacts will be. A pure heart and mind will find enjoyment in the simplest things, in a beautiful sky, lovely greenery, a pleasant conversation. Anyone who has not purified him or herself very much might not even notice these things. They may never look at the sky or the greenery. They may search for pleasant contacts through much grosser possibilities. Drink or drugs, indulgence in food or sex might seem their only obvious source of enjoyment. There is nothing intrinsically wrong with enjoying the pleasures of the senses when they are harmless and refined. The Buddha called them a danger, though, because we so easily make them our goal and direction. We try to get more and more of them, or to keep them. Try to make them permanent, not to lose them. That's what goes wrong with us, because it's an untenable proposition. There's no way we can make it come true. No sense contact can be permanent. In fact, it would become very unpleasant if that were the case. There's also no way of making sure that we can get pleasant sensations. Trying for them takes up our time and energy and leaves no room in our lives for meaningful pursuits. Our senses are with us. We can't deny them, and there's no reason to do so. But it is possible, through mindfulness, to realize that the pleasure we get from them is fool's gold. It glitters but has no value. The glitter can be enjoyed, but one should not attach any importance to it. Yet again and again problems arise for people because they can't get what they want through the senses. Deva happiness. The next step in happiness is called the Deva happiness. But it doesn't mean that we have to become devas. that we have to first die and then get reborn in the Deva realm. That sounds like pie in the sky. It doesn't seem to have any bearing on our present lives. The Deva happiness is the happiness that comes to a person who has cultivated the 4 divine abidings, the 4 emotions of loving kindness, compassion, joy with others, and equanimity. That kind of happiness can be compared to living in heaven upon earth. Such happiness is independent of the 5 senses and only dependent upon our own minds. The underlying condition is the purification of the heart so that it contains only lovingness and compassion. Both lovingness and compassion are qualities of the heart, just as intelligence is a quality of the mind, and they can be cultivated. When that has been done, happiness is one's own. Other people benefit also, but the primary result is one's own happiness, because the heart is totally independent of being influenced by outside occurrences. Whatever people do or say, what happens or doesn't happen in the world, has no bearing on oneself. When the quality of the heart has been cultivated and has been made pure and full of love and compassion, nothing can touch it. There's peace, harmony, ease, and a feeling of security in mind and heart. This is a far greater happiness than the pleasure obtained through one of the senses. While in itself it does not lead to or have as its result liberation, it is a necessary ingredient on the path. Lovingness and compassion alone don't produce insight. They smooth the waves of emotion. When those waves of grief, pain, lamentation, worry, fear, and anxiety, envy and jealousy, dislike and resentment have finally come to rest, there is a clear reflection without any obscuring ripples in it, like a mirror, the mirror of the mind. That mirror of the mind makes it possible to get a clear vision. Without cultivating these purifying qualities, it's not possible to develop further. It's all very well to understand, to know, and to quote, but it doesn't take one to the end of suffering. The waves of emotion are obstructive. They not only get in the way of clear vision, they even obstruct the vision of the path itself. When there are waves, one can no longer see where one is going. Indeed, one might even forget that one is going anywhere at all. The happiness of the Deva realm doesn't depend upon rebirth. It's possible right here and now. It's internal work that can be done by anyone at any time. There are no special times such as meditation courses or special people who can do it. This is a happiness which of itself, without going any further, creates a different kind of life for the one who has done the internal work. The happiness of concentration. The third kind of happiness is the happiness of concentration that comes from meditation. That too is only possible if one has achieved purification in moral conduct, generosity, and loving kindness in the heart. It doesn't require perfection, because that is reserved for the Arahant. It does require some expansion of heart and mind. The happiness one gets from concentration is glimpsed often by meditators, but one needs to cultivate such concentration and practice diligently to enter into the meditative absorptions. There are different degrees of meditative absorptions resulting in different degrees of joy, bliss, and ecstasy. They all enable the mind to carry some happiness with it, even outside meditation. A person who can enter meditative absorption and experience that kind of happiness is someone who can find happiness even when the sense contacts are unpleasant. Such people know they can return to the happiness of concentration, the meditative absorptions, at any time. Knowing that creates a feeling of ease in the heart because nothing else appears to have great significance. When a person is able to go into the meditative absorptions at will for the length of time they wish, that becomes their reality, and not the quarrels and the arguments, inflation and the wars, the future or the past, and all the other things that people worry about. None of that has real significance. The reality lies within the happiness of the meditative absorptions. The meditative absorptions also prepare the mind. They give the mind not only the ability to be happy, but also the ability to penetrate. The mind that can stand still at will is a mind that has gained strength. The ordinary mind finds it very difficult to stand still. It has a jelly-like quality. It shakes constantly. It doesn't need a trigger. That's its natural mode of behavior. It doesn't have the strength to penetrate the brick wall of delusion. It's not a very good tool, is it? Jelly disintegrates at the slightest contact. A jelly-like mind disintegrates at the slightest blame, at the slightest worry or fear, at the slightest bodily discomfort. A jelly-like mind goes to pieces. What else can it do? A mind that can stand still is a mind that has the quality of a rock, solid, unmoving. A rock is a better tool with which to penetrate a brick wall than jelly. A rock-like mind isn't going to disintegrate at the slightest impact. It has the strength of a finely honed tool, with which we can pierce this apparent reality in which we live and reach absolute reality. There are 8 different stages of meditative absorption, and they are like 8 rooms in a house. If one has finally found the front door with the right key and opens it up and goes into the first room, there is no reason why one can't walk into all the other 7 rooms also. It is not so difficult to find the front door and put the key in. The key is called mindfulness of breath, and the front door is found when one continues with determination and perseverance to keep on meditating. One doesn't sit back and say, "That's enough, my knees are hurting," or "What's the use?" or "Maybe next life," or "It's too difficult," or any of the many other excuses. The Buddha said, "A fool says, it's too early, it's too late, it's too hot, it's too cold, I'm too full, I'm too empty." The front door is there for everyone to find. We have the key. We have to fit it into the lock. When we open the door, we find that the rooms in this house are splendid. The splendor is within our own hearts and minds, but at present it's locked up. We have no access unless we create it through meditation. Most people never unlock it because they don't know what the key is, nor do they know that there is such an entrance. We are very fortunate to know the door, and there may already be a small opening through which the light is shining. When the concentration has been constant for some time, the mind becomes very quiet, and so does the body. Every single moment of concentration is a moment of purification. The defilements that beset us, causing our unhappiness and difficulties, are momentarily laid aside. The more often we lay them aside, the less habitual they become. The more often we can concentrate, the more often we are without them. Having a pure, bright mind then becomes our second nature. Concentration starts out with the experience of pleasant feelings. These pleasant feelings arise because the mind at that stage is untroubled. This indicates clearly that if one were untroubled and had a pure, bright mind at all times, one would constantly have pleasant feelings. Here we get an indication of what is possible, which makes us want this state more often. This desire for the wholesome and beneficial will eventually bring us to the point of no desire, finally eliminating all dissatisfaction. Concentration starting out with the pleasant feelings goes on to the next stage, where there's happiness. Again, this is a clear indication that the pure mind knows only happiness. If there's unhappiness, there's impurity. The two go together. A happy person doesn't gain joy through sensual desires because they know how elusive such joys are. A truly happy person is someone who is joyfully independent of outer conditions. Such a person can concentrate and thereby find a home for the mind where it can be totally at ease. But also that person has achieved purification to the point where unhappiness no longer arises. Unhappiness is caused by defilements. When unhappiness arises, we can investigate its cause, and invariably we will find an underlying defilement. If we don't find that, we haven't investigated well enough. In the concentrated states, the mind lets go of the 5 hindrances. When pleasant feelings and happiness have arisen, peacefulness and equanimity follow. Equanimity results in a feeling of having no desire left. Sometimes people even think that they have become permanently desireless, which is, of course, a misconception. But at least for that moment, there's no desire. That in itself is a very valuable experience, inasmuch as one gets to know a state of no desire. It's utter bliss, the only bliss worth having. When one experiences it, then one knows what one is striving for. One isn't striving to get anything. One is striving to get rid of everything. This is an interesting misconception in most people's minds. When one first starts meditating, one hopes to get peace, happiness, and bliss, some of which may actually arise, but only if one has let go of something else. Namely, one has let go of some of one's ego supports and most of one's desires. When the bliss of no desire is experienced momentarily, we know that's what we really want. But we have to see clearly that it isn't the bliss as such, but the cause for it that needs cultivating. That means renunciation, giving up. Without renunciation, life is a constant striving for something. Renunciation is the answer to all kinds of achievement syndromes, not just in the material world, but even in the spiritual world. Trying to achieve something in the spiritual world is just as foolish as trying to achieve something in the material world. There is nothing to achieve, there's only letting go. As we let go, more and more, of ego identifications, desires, and support systems, bliss will arise. Happiness that arises through concentration is based upon purity. A similar happiness can be experienced in one's daily life if purity has been cultivated. In the meditative practice, pleasant feelings, happiness, and equanimity become deeper and more profound than in daily living. But unless one has already attained some purity in one's ordinary life, one won't be able to do it in meditation either. Daily living and meditation go hand in hand. The harder it is to get a pleasant feeling in meditation, the more purification one needs to practice. There's no blame attached to any of this, they're just states of development. Happiness of concentration is often considered to be the ultimate achievement anyone can have. That's a misconception, because such happiness too is impermanent and not independent, nor unconditioned. It's conditioned by many factors, that there is a certain amount of quiet around one, that the body is still in a fair condition so that it can still sit still, and that one can concentrate. Although this kind of happiness is independent of outer conditions entering through the senses, it's dependent upon the inner condition of the mind and body. It cannot be the greatest happiness yet. Happiness of insight. The greatest happiness, the 4th stage, is the happiness of insight. This is irreversible. Insight, in Buddhist terminology, is always directed toward impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and non-self. Either one of the 3 or all 3. If one sees one of the 3 characteristics clearly, then one knows all of them because they are totally interconnected. The happiness and bliss of total insight means that one has shed the burden of ego delusion. When one can let go of that, the relief and release is immense. Ramana Maharishi, who was a sage in southern India, compared ego delusion to people taking a train journey. They enter the train and stand in the aisle holding onto their luggage instead of putting it in the luggage rack and letting the train carry it. Like this, we carry the burden of ego around with us when we need not. Ego delusion makes everything seem to be threatening or attacking us, or occasionally defending us, difficult to master, an obstacle, like a mountain that has to be climbed. It can make life look quite difficult. Defilements are either wanting or hating, being without energy or being worried, anxious, resisting, or defending one's own viewpoint. But when one lives quite free from any view, is virtuous, with perfect insight won. That's a description of an arahant. Our own viewpoints are our downfall. The minute we start defending them, we can be sure that we are only defending ego. The defense of a viewpoint is an indication that it is not based on experience. Experience needs no defense. The Buddha's teaching is experiential. Viewpoints are based on ego. None of them are absolute truth. Insight into the constant flux and flow of all phenomena, including ourselves, brings the understanding that there's nothing in this world worth keeping, worth holding on to. Insight releases one from that resistance to other people's viewpoints that can make life so immensely difficult. Other people have other viewpoints. The only answer to that is, may they live long and happily. Attachment to one's own viewpoint only shows that one hasn't yet grasped impermanence. When one sees constant change in everything, so that one can never really say, I am this, then a first breakthrough into depth perception happens. Which one am I? Am I the one sitting here who had a good meditation yesterday, or the one who had a lot of distractions today, or the one who's angry, or the one who's resisting, or the one who's accepting and devoted? Which one? If I'm all of those, what a conglomeration of people I am. I must be a whole tribe of people instead of just one. So either I'm none or I'm all of them. We'll have to make a choice. If we don't want to be none, then of course we choose to be all of them. Then we have to imagine that there are at least 1 million different people in oneself. That's not an exaggeration, because by this time in our lives we must have had 1 million different ideas, feelings, viewpoints, reactions over the years, in this lifetime alone. If we choose to be that many different people, life becomes even more complicated than if we were none of them. How about choosing to be none of them? This insight is very threatening to our ego concept. Why is that? Because I want to be. To be what? To be whom? To be where? For what reason? All our viewpoints, conditioned through our thinking process. The happiness that arises when one lets go of all that is the happiness that is embedded in acceptance and peacefulness. Nothing needs to be achieved, accomplished, or changed. All is as it is. The 4 stages of happiness that start with sensual desire and lead through into insight are a continual purification process. The only way any of this can be verified is through our own experience. For that, our own inner work has to have priority. There are no holidays when doing that work, whether we are at the beach or in the meditation hall, driving a car or flying in an airplane. There's no respite. In order to graduate from sensual desire, we can put our attention on service to others. That means on love and compassion. Service to others means forgetting the self. When one gives service to others, it doesn't matter whether one is helping them to wash their feet or helping them to meditate. There's no difference. Love is service. Service is love. Concentration is supported by the lovingness in one's heart. One of the 11 benefits of loving kindness is that the mind is quickly concentrated. Concentration must not be considered the goal and the end. It is only the means. It is the means for cultivating a mind that is able to penetrate reality. There are 2 kinds of reality, relative and absolute. Everyone knows relative reality. There we find woman and man, young and old, poor and rich, stupid and intelligent. There are animals, trees, flowers, stars, moon, and heavens, and all are judged, whether they make me happy. In absolute reality, there's none of that. There are physical manifestations of mind-made objects. That's all. There isn't a single me, nor a single you. Nothing. just manifestations that are constantly changing. Even the universe is constantly changing, contracting and expanding, and so are we. The mind that has become concentrated, happy, and peaceful is a mind that can accept this constantly changing universe and use it for its own benefit. The mind that is not peaceful rejects such reality out of hand and says, "But I want to be happy." That's the mind of most people in the world. The mind that doesn't need any outer conditions for happiness is the mind that can say, "This is the release from all suffering. This is true happiness." Such a mind sees with clarity the absolute reality of what's happening in this universe and doesn't have to hang on anything, attach to anything, doesn't have to become anything, doesn't have to be anything. It just does what is necessary at each particular moment, and then lets go. The happiness of insight is not exhilaration or elation. It's the sort of happiness that has peacefulness at its base and a lack of desire, striving, and delusion as its result. When delusion is gone, the pure, bright mind knows only that which is real.